Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal exciting news on Wednesday, August 6, 2025. First, Danny had always sensed that something about Rocco's past didn't add up. But he never imagined the day would come when that mystery would present itself in such a dramatic and emotional way. Rocco had been going through a difficult time. Haunted by questions about his identity and the pieces of his family history that had never quite made sense. Danny, ever the loyal friend, stayed close, offering support without pushing too hard. He knew Rocco was struggling and didn't want to overwhelm him further. So when Britt suddenly reappeared in Rocco's life, claiming a bond far deeper than he could comprehend, Danny instinctively stepped into the role of protector and guide. What was meant to be a casual afternoon turned into an emotional turning point when Britt approached them with the quiet intensity of someone carrying a truth too long kept hidden. Rocco stood frozen as Britt revealed the unthinkable. She had once carried him in her womb, the result of a medically complex and emotionally controversial surrogacy involving Lulu's embryo. The shock washed over him like cold water, leaving him speechless and visibly shaken. His whole life, he had known Lulu as his mother, the only maternal figure he could remember nurturing him, comforting him, teaching him right from wrong. And now, in front of him, stood another woman who claimed to have once loved him before giving him up. Britt's voice trembled as she spoke of her desire to be part of Rocco's life again, not to replace Lulu, but to share in the care and love of the boy she still considered her child. For Rocco, the situation was a whirlwind of confusion, love, guilt, and fear, all colliding in the space of a few moments. In the days that followed, Rocco withdrew into himself, unable to express what he was feeling. He avoided eye contact with both Britt and Lulu, uncertain whether to feel betrayed, honored, or frightened. Danny remained by his side through it all. Walking with him through the park, sitting with him in silence on the docks, and gently asking questions that helped Rocco untangle his feelings. Danny never claimed to understand exactly what Rocco was going through, but his calm demeanor and quiet strength made it easier for Rocco to begin processing. With every hour spent together, Rocco began to voice his doubts and fears, finally admitting that he didn't know if he could accept Britt's love without hurting Lulu. The guilt tore at him. And Danny was the one who reminded him that love, when true, had space for more than one person. Danny encouraged Rocco to take things slowly, to allow himself the time to think and feel without pressure or expectation. He reminded him that it was okay not to have answers immediately and that people who truly loved him would give him the space to figure things out. Danny's support became a quiet anchor during a time of emotional storm. Meanwhile, Britt continued to reach out gently, leaving messages and small gifts. Never demanding anything but patiently hoping for a connection. Lulu, too, began to struggle privately with the idea of sharing her son with someone she once distrusted but now saw in a new light. The adults in Rocco's life were bracing for conflict, but Rocco, with Danny's guidance, was choosing clarity over chaos. Eventually, Rocco asked to see Britt again. Not to make any grand declarations or decisions, but simply to look into her eyes and see for himself whether the love she claimed was real. Danny was there before and after. And that understanding his origin didn't mean abandoning the life he'd always known. Britt's return had shaken his world, but Danny's quiet wisdom had grounded it. The road ahead would be uncertain, full of hard conversations and emotional growth, but for the first time in days, Rocco felt a little less afraid, because he wasn't walking it alone. Second, Laura had long anticipated that one day the past would come back to complicate the already fragile threads holding her family together, but she never expected it to happen so suddenly. When Dante entered her home that afternoon, his face worn with tension and urgency, she knew this wasn't just another discussion about Rocco's struggles or Lulu's recovery. The moment he mentioned Britt's name, her heart dropped. Britt's return was already sending shockwaves through Rocco's world. And now Dante feared that the emotional toll would deepen into lasting damage. Britt's revelation about her role in Rocco's conception had confused the boy to his core, and Dante. The idea that Britt might not only confuse Rocco but also reopen wounds in Lulu, wounds barely beginning to heal, troubled Dante more than he could admit. Laura listened without interrupting. Her instinct wasn't to panic or to condemn Britt outright, though she understood Dante's fear. She had her own reservations about Britt. But she also recognized that the situation required grace and control, not confrontation. She reminded Dante gently, yet firmly, that Rocco was still there, still grounded in their love. And that the worst thing they could do now was to fracture his world further by allowing Lulu and Britt to turn against each other. The child didn't need sides, he needed stability. The line between biology and motherhood was already blurred for him, and it was their job to help him find meaning, not chaos, in the truth. Dante hadn't expected calm logic from his mother. Not when he felt like the floor beneath him was cracking. But Laura's ability to shift the conversation away from emotion and into purpose gave him a thread of hope. She spoke of how easy it would be for this moment to spiral into bitterness, of Lulu viewing Britt's return as a threat, of Britt fighting for validation rather than connection. But none of that would serve Rocco. What he needed was unity, or at the very least, a ceasefire. Laura urged Dante to protect Rocco not by pushing Britt away. And Laura knew from experience that fractured trust in a child often left scars too deep to fully heal. As Dante processed his mother's words, his own rage began to settle into resolve. He could speak with Lulu and urge her not to see Britt as an enemy. He could speak with Britt, too, not to chase her away, but to set boundaries and expectations. Most importantly, he could be the anchor Rocco needed, even when the waters grew rough. Laura, watching her son find his footing again, felt a quiet reassurance that maybe, just maybe, the next chapter wouldn't be as destructive as the one before. In the end, Laura knew that healing would take time. Rocco's confusion would not vanish overnight. And Lulu's protective instincts would be tested. Britt's sincerity would have to prove itself, not through grand gestures but through patience and presence. But as long as they all remembered the core truth, that Rocco was the center of this storm, not the cause, they could weather it. And so, Laura sat with Dante a while longer, discussing steps, possibilities, and calm strategies, choosing compassion over fear, and love over blame. Third, Lulu had always known that her past would eventually catch up with her. Anchoring herself in the belief that their bond was unshakable, that love and presence were enough to shield him from the messy beginnings of his conception. Yet the moment Britt reappeared, she couldn't afford to navigate this alone. She needed an ally, someone whose strength and influence could help her draw a firm line in the sand. And so, with growing desperation, Tracy's love came in the form of strategy and tenacity, and Lulu knew that if she could win her over, she'd gain more than just emotional support, she'd gain a formidable protector. When Lulu approached her, it wasn't with tears but with tightly controlled urgency. She laid out her fears, that Britt's return wasn't temporary. The mere idea of losing Rocco, of even sharing him in a way that diminished her role, was unbearable. Lulu wasn't just afraid of the legal consequences. She was terrified of the emotional damage it could inflict on her son. Tracy, who had seen her own family splinter in countless ways, listened intently. Her expression unreadable at first but her loyalty quietly solidifying. To Lulu's immense relief, Tracy didn't hesitate. She promised she would stand by her, not just in private but in public. With all the weight of her reputation and resources behind her. Tracy might have had her differences with Lulu over the years, but she adored her in that unspoken, protective way that made her a natural guardian when times grew dark. She understood, better than most, what it meant to fight for a child. Though comforted by Tracy's presence, couldn't shake the unease settling deep within her. She knew Rocco was perceptive. And she feared that he would begin to sense the growing tension between the adults in his life. He had already become quieter, more thoughtful, less trusting of sudden changes. Eager maternal figure, especially one with a direct biological claim. Even though Lulu was Rocco's emotional anchor, she feared that the world wouldn't always see it that way. The fear of losing him wasn't just legal, it was psychological. She had fought so hard to build a family, to create something stable out of the ashes of trauma. She also knew that turning Britt into a villain wouldn't serve anyone, especially not her son. That's why she needed Tracy, not only to help her prepare for any worst-case scenarios but to serve as a compass when her own emotions threatened to cloud her judgment. Lulu didn't want to sabotage Rocco's emotional growth, but she also couldn't bear the idea of standing by while another woman claimed to love her child as deeply as she did. In the privacy of her own heart, Lulu began preparing for a painful reality, that the fight for Rocco might not be about choosing who's right, but about who can love him without turning him into a battlefield. Tracy's support gave her strength, but even that might not be enough to soothe the ache of a mother who feels her hold slipping. One quiet day at a time. Fourth, Sonny had faced countless enemies in his lifetime, but there was something uniquely unsettling about the way Sidwell operated. This wasn't the overt aggression of rival mob families or the fiery chaos of street-level threats. No, Sidwell was methodical, almost surgical in the way he inflicted damage. He didn't strike once and retreat. He chipped away at Sonny's life, undermining his reputation, his businesses, and his family in ways so subtle they were almost undetectable, until the pattern became impossible to ignore. The catalyst, of course, had been Natalia's death. It was ruled an accident. What made the situation worse was Marco's betrayal. Sonny had once mentored Marco, treated him like a son, trusted him to handle delicate operations with discretion and loyalty. But when Marco publicly stood by Sidwell's side, refusing to even express doubt about Sonny's alleged role in Natalia's death, the message was clear. Sonny wasn't just being isolated, he was being replaced. Marco's allegiance was a stamp of legitimacy on Sidwell's crusade, and now risked losing control over the empire he had spent decades building. And still, Sidwell had the audacity to play innocent, letting others speculate, whisper. Written off by authorities as an electrical mishap. But the timing had always felt too perfect. Michael had just begun investigating financial irregularities in one of Sonny's businesses, and his injury conveniently halted those efforts. Then came the raid on Sonny's liquor warehouse, an event chalked up to anonymous tips and bureaucratic oversight. Yet the pattern was too tight. The more he realized that Sidwell had been orchestrating this war from the shadows for far longer than anyone suspected. With each new revelation, Sonny's anger grew colder, more focused. This wasn't about business rivalries anymore. It was personal. Sidwell had chosen Natalia as the emotional leverage point, and he had chosen well. Her death not only devastated Sonny but shifted public sympathy away from him. It made Sonny look reckless, unstable, perhaps even culpable. Now, with Marco as his mouthpiece, Sidwell was using that sympathy to paint Sonny as a dangerous relic of an era that no longer had a place in Port Charles. But what Sidwell didn't realize was that Sonny was no stranger to reinvention. But with the same precision Sidwell had employed, he wouldn't announce his plans or seek revenge through obvious violence. He would dig into Sidwell's alliances, find the cracks, turn his own people against him. He would trace every financial channel, every whisper of bribery, every manipulated deal that propped Sidwell up. And when he struck, disgrace him, and watch as his carefully built world unraveled from within. But even as Sonny prepared to go on the offensive, he remained haunted by the price already paid. Natalia was gone. Michael was scarred. The people closest to him had been hurt in ways that no revenge could undo. And yet, Sonny couldn't afford to mourn forever. He had to protect what remained. He had to show Sidwell, and Marco, that tearing down a man like Sonny Corinthos came with consequences. This wasn't about reclaiming power, it was about justice, vengeance, and the preservation of a legacy built on pain, loyalty, and survival. Sidwell had declared war. Sonny was about to end it. Finally, Michael had always believed that boundaries were necessary, especially when it came to the safety and emotional well-being of his children. But nothing could have prepared him for the wave of fury that surged through him upon learning that Willow had once contemplated kidnapping Daisy, the daughter he shared with Sasha. The revelation hit like a thunderclap, shattering whatever fragile trust still lingered between them. To Michael, this wasn't just a moment of emotional instability. It wasn't just about Daisy, it was about Wiley, about Amelia, about the emotional volatility Willow continued to bring into their lives. He felt an obligation to protect his children. It wasn't to excuse Willow's behavior but to plead for understanding. He had watched Willow unravel in the aftermath of Drew's betrayal. Seen how the weight of emotional manipulation and isolation had driven her to desperation. Chase didn't condone the kidnapping fantasy, but he understood the mind that birthed it. For him, this wasn't the time for punishment, it was the time for compassion. He reminded Michael that it was his own unrelenting control over who Willow could see and when that had contributed to her decline. The strict visitation limits, the constant questioning of her mental fitness. The withholding of moments that could have grounded her in love and stability, Chase believed all of it had pushed Willow to the edge. Their argument intensified quickly. Michael refused to see himself as the villain. In his eyes, everything he had done was to protect his children. He had witnessed Willow's erratic behavior firsthand, her mood swings, her outbursts. Especially for the children. He couldn't afford to gamble their emotional security on the hope that Willow would improve. For Michael, the line had already been crossed. There was no going back. Chase's plea for empathy only fueled his frustration, making him feel cornered and misunderstood. Chase, growing more agitated, accused Michael of turning his grief into control. He pointed out that while Drew's deception had shattered Willow's sense of self, Michael's cold refusal to extend even a sliver of forgiveness had cemented her downfall. Chase didn't deny Willow's mistakes, but he questioned how Michael could so easily forget all the good she had done, the love she had shown to Wiley, the maternal bond she had built with Amelia. The sacrifices she had made. He feared that Michael's vendetta wasn't about protecting the children anymore but about punishing Willow for daring to lose control. And in doing so, he was only perpetuating the very isolation that had driven her to the brink in the first place. Michael, stung by the accusation, stood firm. He didn't want to hear justifications. In his world, he didn't believe that letting her see the children more often would heal her. He believed it would confuse them, expose them to emotional instability, and potentially enable Willow's downward spiral. He told Chase that love wasn't a free pass to jeopardize a child's safety. He had seen firsthand what emotional instability could do to a child's life. And he wasn't about to let history repeat itself, no matter how much Chase pleaded for leniency. Their argument ended with silence thick and unresolved. Neither man had truly heard the other. Chase left feeling that Willow had no advocate left in her corner, while Michael returned to his routine with the cold certainty that he had done the right thing. But beneath the surface, cracks had begun to form. Trust was eroding, not just between Michael and Willow, but between Michael and the few people who still believed redemption was possible. And if things continued down this path, it wouldn't be long before the emotional distance hardened into something far more permanent, something no amount of justification could reverse.